I mean, eventually I'd rather you didn't stand immediately behind me, but...
Oh, is that where you're standing?
Yeah, this is where I'm standing.
Aren't you going to stand next to it?
No, how do I control the computer?
Don't you have a clicky button thing?
Not if you're doing After Effects.
Okay.
It's very much a... Whoa, 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 whoa!
Savannah?
Savannah! Ah!
Hijacking the whole thing.
Ruiner of cables.
We are ready.
Come on, Noel.
Is he coming?
He made a point of asking a couple of times about this. I'm like, all right. Martin, you coming?
I'll listen here for just a few minutes.
Okay.
I've got a question.
All right.
Is this software to edit moving images?
This is to composite still images into moving images. Editing videos uses a different tool.
All right.
But let me see if I even have that installed. So the short answer is I don't know. I do have it installed. Okay.
And I guess it's something that you cannot do in Photoshop.
No. Well, you can, but it's not very good because Photoshop isn't built for this sort of work.
All right.
After Effects is designed from the outset for this sort of work.
Okay.
Noel, you get 30 more seconds.
I go and get him.
Run, run, run.
And by any chance, do you know how long it's gonna take? Because I'm not giving you any.
I'm hoping to be done with the tutorial a bit before 4.
Sorry, I was trying to.
It's all right.
We will forgive you, but just for this time.
Sorry for holding it.
My money.
So, After Effects at its very core is, think of it as a Photoshop for video. You can load a video in and make changes to it, or you can build new composites. In this instance, we're using it for stop motion animation, which is one of the things it's very, very good at. Specifically, the rotating of an object, so it looks swished and fancy. And
So this is what you have on your, this is the After Effects program.
Yep.
Yes, that's the one.
So, we've done a couple of different projects, a couple of different composites, but the trickiest one has been Strathmore, the horse's head. It has been nothing but a prolonged nightmare. As such, it's a very good use case for what I'm about to show you. So, when you're doing stop motion animation, you want first things first, all the images must be the highest possible resolution and they must be the same resolution. So you can't have some at, say, 1920 by 1080 and some at 1920 by 1200. Won't work, it will throw After Effects off spectacularly. Everything must be a uniform size, a uniform resolution, and ideally a uniform color space. So a standard export out of Capture One will allow you to do that. You can load any kind of images into After Effects. It works best, however, with high-res JPEGs or TIFFs. In this instance, we'll be working with JPEGs.
Should we upload TIFFs then? Because so
You-
far we are only uploading high
You can do
resolution.
TIFFs. After Effects can handle almost anything. JPEG is better, however, for the simple reason that there's less re-rendering needed. Because After Effects doesn't care about 8-bit or 16-bit. It doesn't care about compression algorithms. It doesn't even care to a certain degree about what image format you give it. What it cares about is, for this sort of work, standardized files. As long as they're all the same format, it doesn't care less. So here's a folder I prepared earlier. Now when you're working in stop motion, you want to be working with batches of 12, so 24, 36, 48, 60, or 72 stills. This project has 38 frames, which
Why
is
do you need batches of 12?
Yeah.
because it's to do with the mechanics of how the eye perceives things. In film and TV, you work at 25 or 24 frames per second. The modern standard is 24 frames per second. Ideally, whatever you do, you want to be working with a number that is directly divisible by 12. Because it makes the maths for doing calculating frame rates and the maths for what the brain will accept easier. The problem we discovered with this is when you're working with something that's not quite right, so for example, 38 frames, you have to screw with the frame rate. Otherwise the brain goes, wait, what? and you perceive it as slow, it messes with you quite badly.
I've lost you. So what are you saying? That we need always to give images in batches of 12?
No. The total number of images that you are animating must be a directly divisible by 12. So 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72.
Which means when I'm shooting something, I need to bear that in mind.
Yes, you do. That's quite important. And if you, at some point, we will buy a motorized dolly which has, you can set which block of 12 you want to work in.
Mm-hmm.
You can, however, make it work with something that is not divisible by 12. For example, 38. But you're now getting into the mechanics of screwing around with what display frame rate you use in After Effects. But we'll come on to that in a minute. So this is a folder we prepared earlier, full of pictures of this lovely horse. Goldstripe, anyone gets that reference?
I can sense some sarcasm there.
I don't know what you mean. Now, you note when I just dragged and dropped the folder in, it's done that. Importer.jpg. After Effects natively, if you give it a folder of images, will say, oh, hang on, these all have sequential numbers. I presume this is an animated sequence. Don't drag the folder in. It tries to be clever. It's one of After Effects' biggest flaws.
So don't do what you just did.
Exactly. I showed you that specifically so you could see what it would generate, which is something that is utterly useless to us. What you have to do is go into the folder, select the images, and drag them in like that.
Oh, like how?
Literally just drag it in as though you're dragging an item into Photoshop.
Okay.
I'll do it again.
Yeah, I don't see the difference with the first one. That's why the first one you drag the folder. Ah, okay, good.
It brings up that error message, which is, hang on, there's 8 things missing in this number sequence. This must be an animated sequence, but you've got 8 frames missing. But I'm still going to import it. If you were to render and play this, you would see blank gaps like that. You would also see it playing at real time, which is utterly useless to us. The auto import tool is really badly designed. So we manually drag the stills in. So first things first, we actually need to build a construct. So with all your frames selected there, you drag them onto this icon here. There are 3 icons, so
Which one? You drag on
the third one, create new composition. When you drag it on, it goes, do you want to create a composition from what you have given me? Why, yes. Yes, I do. So by default, we work at still duration of 5 frames at base 25. We sequence the layers, and we overlap with a duration of 1. With no transition. There's only one of a number of ways of doing this. The method you know is dissolve front layer, but ultimately it doesn't matter.
What is dissolving the front layer? What?
Dissolve front layer says fade the top layer out so the next image is visible. It's a slightly smoother way of doing it.
They kind of blend together, no?
Yes, it does blending. It's much less harsh. I generally work with transition off, but for the kind of work we're doing, dissolve front layer is your friend. These are your default settings. This is what you should be generally working to.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
I think you are going very fast. And I've got problems to follow you. I think, first of all, you have to explain us about the display of the screen that we what we see on the screen. Because you're going and pressing buttons that I don't know where they exist.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you?
I've got a very specific way of learning things, and if you...
It's the reason why we're filming this.
I can't
This is all being recorded.
right now.
Right now, it's been recording for 10 minutes.
Oh, what? On your computer screen?
And the microphone. So you can hear my commentary. Yeah, there's a microphone in the laptop. It's recording all the audio. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're properly accredited in the video. Okay, so for your benefit, this is the After Effects working interface. We generally work in the default interface. There are multiple ones you can switch to. This is the one we work in. You have your Project and Object Explorer here on the left. In the middle, you have the composition. This is actually show me my project. On the right, we have information, audio, preview, effects, info. This side of the window is far less useful to you. You will probably almost certainly never use it. At the bottom, you have your composition timeline, actually allowing you to move through the project and see what you are working on at what point the play bar is at. So let's re-import the images. Let's put them on a composition and press OK. What that does is it builds a composition. It's literally just done it for us. There we go. So if I render that, you see the horse is very gently turning. Once it's rendered the entire thing, the play bar here will go green. That means I have rendered it, you can now watch it at real time, as opposed to frame by frame single. Give it a moment. After Effects timelines play infinitely, so once you start the playback, it will just keep playing. There we are, that's what the horse looks like as he rotates. It's a very pretty horse. Now you'll note I haven't made any changes to the project size. We're working at the full resolution of the images. You don't resize anything in this first composition. This is always at full size, full resolution. We're going to take that composition and put it into something else shortly. It looks very nice. It's a lovely horse. So where is our composition? There it is. You want to get into a good habit for naming. So I would call this 360 Sladmore T1. So one of the nice things about
T1.
Timeline 1. You can call it anything you like. I generally do T1, T2, T3 because then I can backtrack up the layers. One of the nice things about After Effects is I can take a composition like this and put it in a composition. This second composition is now your playground. It is here that we will begin making changes, making modifications, resizing, restructuring. So first things first, and you have that look that says I have a question. No. Speak up.
So this is like grouping all the layers together, what you just did up there.
Similar.
Like Photoshop when you're grouping.
Similar, yes.
Why don't you say that you are doing this so that the video players can play it? Isn't it why you're doing this, so that you can change the film to J?
Yes, that's what we're doing in the second timeline.
Yes, and
Yes.
that's why you have to create the second composition.
Get to it.
Yeah, because that's
Timeline
because
2.
I know it makes more sense.
So the second
Yeah.
The second timeline here, we've put the composition in another composition so we can begin modifying it, we can shrink it, we can make color adjustments, we can apply cleanup filters.
So you keep the first composition as it is.
And then you put
then
that
you
into
copy
another.
it in a way.
Yes, you nest it.
Yeah, okay.
So in here we can now go composition settings. The composition is T2. We can now begin making changes. So generally the render preset that you guys work to is Film 2K. And what you will have noticed is suddenly the display has shrunk massively. So we need to resize it. So on the timeline, you select your composition one and it's the transform settings. And in here we want scale, and then we just shrink it down to what we want.
So did you change the size of just one picture? Or
I changed the composition
the
down to 2K, and then I'm rescaling composition 1 to fit it. So composition 1, still here, still at full resolution, quite happy, minding its own business. We're now making transformations to it in another composition.
So have you duplicated it, the composition?
No, it's nested. We don't make any duplicates at this point. It's just something embedded within something else.
Can you, sorry, say again how you not duplicate, mix it?
You grab your composition or whatever you want and you drag it onto the back onto the new composition button, and it builds a brand new thing. We don't need that, so I'm going to get rid of that. So here is composition 2. Doesn't it look lovely? It's a very pretty horse. Now, we have a concern. Well, the horse is looking a little underexposed. The colour's not looking right. So we need to fix that. Let me just So, it's at this point we make use of what's called an adjustment layer. It's much like a blank layer in in Photoshop, except in After Effects it's called adjustment layer. So you right click on the timeline down here, you go new, and hiding near the bottom of the list, adjustment layer. What that does is it builds a brand new blank layer atop. You can scale an adjustment layer down to affect a certain area. For example, we just want to affect the pedestal, or I want to do the whole thing, or I want to only have an adjustment layer for certain periods of the timeline, so I only want this adjustment for the first 2 seconds. And then by the time I get after 2 seconds, it's gone.
How did you do that?
You can click and drag on an item down here.
Ah, okay.
So layers, as these are layers in a composition, you can adjust the length that they are visible on screen by selecting it here in the timeline. And when you go to the end, you'll note the cursor has changed to the double arrows. You can click and drag. In this instance, say I only want the horse on screen for this long. Horse is gone. Horse is back. You cannot drag that beyond the end of the media.
If you resize if you move the end of the composition, is it gonna make it appear quickly, or is it gonna remove?
It's going to remove it. It does not adjust the speed or the scale or any of the mathematics. All it is doing is saying, I don't want this visible at this point on the timeline. So let's zoom in and have a quick look. What a lovely horse. However, it is a little desaturated. That is problematic. Also, that pedestal is looking very dirty. Really scratched and scuffed. We should probably fix that. And we will. So, first things first. Let's fix the horse. You can do adjustment layers, color transformations, cleanups. You can put as many of them on as many layers as you like. But good protocol is you put one effect per adjustment layer. So you can actually switch a layer on and off to see what it looks like.
So then, Mario, are you manually applying this layer to all the frames?
That's why we're doing it in another composition. Because it's affecting the entire construct, not one image within the construct. So, adjustment layer 1, effects. At this point, we can pick anything. Now, one of my favourites tends to be where is it now? Oh, I have a different set of plugins to you. How curious. No, what we need to do is color correct. And we generally use Lumetri color. Lumetri color is the industry standard for it. You want to make a color change to a video, this is what you use. It offers varying degrees of control from the very basic all the way up to the I have 3 separate track wheels that I can manually adjust the color on.
Is it compensating for something after the image has been downloaded into
Mhm.
it. Because when we put this one in, it became very different. The colours were different to as it appeared in Photoshop. So is this this is compensating?
Yes. So, as you open up the wheels, they do different things. Now, personally, I generally work in curves because I find it to be the most efficient way of doing this. So let's have a look at the blue curve. I would like to increase the blue. Let's have a look in hue versus saturation. Well, I want to make an adjustment in the blue layer as well. And hue versus luma. I'd like to... Now you see, as I'm doing that, it's affecting the color I'm changing. With all of these plugins and all of these hue settings, you actually need to watch what it's doing. So,
how you can apply that to a specific area? Oh, not of the timeline, of the image.
I'll show you. So, say I only want to affect half the image,
Yeah.
like that.
Okay.
Adjustment layers can be, as I just did, you can literally pick up and change the area it affects. And there you can see a sliver of half the horse affected, half the horse not. Generally, however, I work with across the full height, full width.
I have a question.
Certainly.
So, for example, if these were, can you upload edited images, or would you recommend doing it in After Effects?
So, if you're saying, should I upload images I have already worked on and restored? Yeah, absolutely. What we're doing in After Effects is now making compensations to the master, the final images, before they become an animation. After Effects can sometimes desaturate, flatten color tones, and very rarely actually show up black. This is a video program, so for what sometimes people view as black is, as we all know, not true black. Therefore, it shows up greys and dark blues and dust and scratches more than Photoshop would. Okay, there we go. We've now got that, but that's still slightly scratchy. We should probably fix that next. So in this instance, we're going to, let me just zoom out. I need to create.
Does it have most of the same tools as Photoshop?
It has a lot of very similar tools. They might sometimes be named slightly differently, but in the effects toolbox here, it's almost identical. Now, everything that you see installed here, with the exception of Cinema 4D, is standard for After Effects and will be available in the online tutorials walking you through how to use them. They give you very good instructional videos on Adobe's website, including if you use the sliders this way, it changes the colors like this, or say I want to apply a specific look like cartoon. It walks you through how to do that. Now, we don't really want cartoon, so I'm going to switch that layer off.
I actually might.
All right, then we're doing cartoon. However, before we do cartoon, we need to clean up the pedestal. So I'm going to switch cartoon off. I'm going to rename the layer cartoon. I'm going to rename this layer color correction. Go away. Now you'll note the colors down here are different. Lilac is your adjustment layer. Brown is your composition. So anything that is an object created in this timeline will usually be lilac. If it is brown, it indicates this is another composition or another construct that you are importing in. So we need to clean up the pedestal. However, I've put the adjustment layer higher up, so it's going to affect the order in which the layers render. You can just drag the layer down, which is quite nice. Oh, lovely. So adjustment layer 3, this new layer I've created, I'm going to put it below cartoon but above color correction. And just like Photoshop, you drag and drop the layers. So rename, this is base. So first things first, I need to adjust this so it only affects the base of the pedestal. So let's resize that. Let's drag the layer down. There we go. Next, I need to apply a new effect. So we're going to go with noise and grain. Dust and fine scratches should do the job. If you open that up, you'll see effect has appeared. So if you go, hang on, I can't get to my effect controls, I've lost this window, what do? You can open a layer and see what effects are in there. So here it's dust and scratches. So let's zoom right in. And you'll note it's already begun to actually clean it up. You can see there are dust and scratches.
Do you not have control, like how intense the dust and scratches are?
You do. That's here. So by default, it presumes you have
Oh, yes. Okay.
and a threshold. But actually, the default settings are usually excellent for cleaning up minor scratches. Like that. Can you see that on the projected screen properly? Let me zoom in further. Scratches and dust. No scratches and dust. In this instance, however, I would up the threshold slightly to... Now, you can either use the slider, or you can click here and enter a number. I would do a threshold of 1.2. I'd probably do a radius of 1.4.
And what if the area that you wanted to affect wasn't a square, like the option you give? What if it was a triangle or something?
So in that instance, you can convert the edge of the frame into a different shape, but this is where it begins to get messy.
Okay, forget about that.
The other thing you can do is if it is, so for example, if that horse's head pedestal was there for the bulk of it and then it moved up and round the picture, you could break this adjustment layer timeline down into a frame by frame object, and every frame you'd move where this is. So for example, I need where's the cut tool? It is here somewhere, or maybe it's called split layer now. You know, I can never remember. Every edition they change it slightly where all the components live. The bulk of it remains the same, but it's no, they've changed it. It's keyframing now. So I should probably explain keyframing to you, shouldn't I? So let me drag that up. So up until, say, 1 second, we like that where it is, but now I want to switch it off. So I would set the, sorry, can you see okay? Yeah. So these are called keyframes. If I switch that on, you'll notice create a little dot there. And at this keyframe, I want to say, keep the layer off. You know, when I've gone forward, the opacity remains off. Let's say at 2 seconds, I've decided I want it back on. So I put the dot on. So we have set 2 keyframe points where it starts and finishes. Watch the opacity number there. If I stop it halfway, it's jumped to 25. If we jump again, it's jumped to 62. You can use that to control, you can use keyframes to control how it starts and finishes. If this sort of thing, if you were moving it, so let's say I want to keyframe the opacity there at 100, and then the next frame it's at 0, and then before it has to come back up, I'm going to keyframe it again at 0, and the next frame back at 100. Use keyframes to control the mechanics. If 2 keyframes are next to each other, you can go effectively on, off. If you have 2 keyframes apart with 2 different states, it will do the mathematical translation to get you from A to B. So 0 to 100 over 100 frames, each frame will get a percentage lighter. It does the maths for you, which is quite nice. However, ultimately in this instance, we don't need keyframing. So I'm going to jump to a point where I know it's 100. And if I click the stopwatch, hey, all my keyframes have vanished. That's it. You have now created a composition in After Effects where, oh, hello, don't do that, where you have color corrected the horse, you have cleaned up the dust and scratches on the base, and you've put a lovely cartoon layer on. Does that all make sense? After Effects is not an overly difficult thing to play with. It just needs a bit of practice. So, let's actually look at this thing in all its horse-based glory. Fit. Come on. So once it's done an initial render, it caches that and we'll be able to play it properly. Your Mac Pros will be able to do this far faster than my laptop.
So here you have 38 images.
Mm-hmm. When it plays, you'll note something odd in a moment. Seems a little slow, a little jerky.
Yeah.
That's because it's an inconsistent number of images. If you're working with a small number of images, usually under about 36, you want to work to 5 frames per second. If you're working with over 36 images, you want to work to 4 frames per second. Because the human brain is a wonderful thing and will do all the magical adaptation of controlling the speed itself.
Wait, can you just say what you just said again?
If you're working with under 36 frames, you want to do 5 frames per second with a 1 frame overlap, as we did at the beginning. If you're working with over 36 frames, you want to do 4 frames per second with a 1 frame overlap. However, sometimes you'll encounter this problem, which is, well, hang on, the horse looks weird. Why does it look
The
weird?
angle.
It's not. It's because it's not a standard number of frames. It's 38. The way we eventually, we sent this to the client, and the client went, something's not right. So after about a day and a half's worth of cheating, we discovered that if it's an odd number of frames, when you create your composition,
Can you duplicate?
no, we set that to 3 and sped it up. And that was enough of a cheat to fool the brain into actually making the spin logistics
How
work.
did you bring that menu up again?
What, this one?
Yes.
So I jumped from Effect Controls into Project.
Yes.
I selected all my images. These are the source images. I dragged them onto,
you created a new composition.
yes, new composition at 3 frames. Let's create a new
That might
composition.
be way
So you added an extra frame.
No, we changed
Change the time.
the time that each frame is visible. We shortened it. Now you'll note it's created a brand new composition here. And when we look at it, we're like, hang on, that's shorter, it's faster. But if we play it, come on, render.
So the duration changed from 1 to 1.
The duration changed from 5.5 seconds to 3 seconds because we've shortened it. Odd numbers of frames, as you will come to discover when you're doing this sort of work, means you do end up sitting there and actually manually having to reconstruct the first construct to get the timing right. Once you've got that right, everything else becomes a lot easier.
So you made
Now you'll
the
note, at
process
3 frames, that doesn't look jerky. Actually, it's like, oh yeah, that looks right.
Yeah.
The brain is fooled into thinking, because it's on screen for much less time, the brain goes, oh no, this is good, this is fine. Okay, so we've now sped that up. We've got our new composition. But hang on, how do we copy all our effect layers across? So there's 2 ways of doing it. You can either select your layers and copy it into a new layer. So for example, I take my construct, I put that there. There we are, that's the sped up horse, which is, you'll note, just a few frames over 3 seconds. So if I go back here, I select my adjustment layers, which are 6 seconds. So when you copy an adjustment layer, you will get this message going, hang on, something's not right. I don't understand what's right. And it panics. It's panicking for 2 reasons. One, the composition I've just dropped it in is not the right size, and 2, it's not smart enough to understand what it's doing. So it presumes, oh, hang on, you're copying this effect and I haven't rendered it in this composition. You sure you want to do this? It's just a normal warning. At this point, you can click ignore. Well, actually, no, you click render using software only because it's panicking. It doesn't quite understand what's happening. This is very normal. You only copy adjustment layers across compositions when both compositions are identical. That's one way of doing it if you want to preserve your timelines. It's, however, not the most efficient way of doing it, but it's one you need to know in case you completely screw up one timeline so badly, but you have your effects just right, and you need to copy them over. The easier way of doing it, and anyone that's done this trick before in Photoshop will know exactly what I'm about to do, I turn that layer off. I get my... Is this the right one? Yes, it is. So my new horse timeline. Let me just delete this old one that is select, bin, delete. So there's my new shorter timeline. If I drag that in here and put it there, it's now got all the right effects. It's just too long. So first things first, we need to shrink it. Now, I happen to know the maths is 24%. Which is quite nice. There you go, that's ready to go. So, great, we've got it here, it's done, it's got all the effects, it's got all the framing right, everything's set. But this composition is still twice as long as it needs to be.
They're kind of translucenty, kind of double shifted.
You're talking about this. This is because we used dissolve front frame.
So that's not a problem?
No, it's not.
Okay.
And the human eye will ignore it.
Okay, fine.
So, this is it. We've now got this, but it's too long. How do we shorten this? So you can go into composition settings and shorten it here. But actually, there's a better way of doing it. This green bar here is called the render bar. This bar with the arrow, that says current time indicator, is called the playhead. You can control where the playhead goes to by adjusting this, the work area. Right, that's fixed it. That project is now 3 seconds in a frame. You adjust the work area to say, this is where we stop playing, this is where we stop rendering, this is where work stops.
How did you bring again the one composition into the other?
Pick it up,
Ah,
drag
you
it
just,
in. Literally, you just drag it in.
How did you stop? How did you shorten the composition?
How did I adjust them? Like that. It's literally stacking layers.
So all of those, everything in that section that your cursor's in at the moment, is
Mhm.
that just for one composition?
Yep.
I hate this. It looks so confusing.
It's actually not that confusing. When you begin playing with it, it's fairly logical.
Right.
So let's adjust the end of the work area.
You're gonna miss a part of the composition if you reduce the. It's not gonna do a full.
Watch. So now it has to render. Any layers you're not using, by the way, switch off. It saves processing power. Now, switch on your horse cartoon layer. You asked for this. This will forever be your horse cartoon layer. Off.
Was the main problem, and obviously there were lots of other problems, but was it because of the frames, the amount of frames? That was, when you said it was causing you a nightmare, was that the nightmare? Was
Yeah.
how to resolve the problem?
How do we make it look
smooth?
but also how to play at a speed that you don't look at it and feel slightly disconcerted?
So what is the part out of the frame?
This here,
Yeah,
this is no longer
it's not
playable. It's literally dead space. The work area says I am, so here is work area start, here is work area end. Whenever you're working in any video or motion graphics program, you always say, when you're working with a timeline construct, work area start, work area end. If I drag the work area start there, that's all that will render in play. Well, when I reset it properly, at any rate.
Yeah, okay, that's why I thought. That's why I don't understand how it's still doing a 3060 when you reduced.
Because we sped the we created a new composition and sped everything up.
Okay.
So we've gone from 5 frames to 3 frames.
Okay, I just thought that you reduced it like randomly, but you knew where.
A lot of experimentation. When we started playing with this composition, we went much higher and went, no, this isn't working. And then we tried adjusting the speed of the composition, and that doesn't work either. The quickest, cleanest solution, particularly for stop motion animation, is to create a new construct and say, you are all an equal number of frames. Do not do speed transformations. As I'm sure you will have noticed, if I jump back to my master timeline, if I open this up, there is a speed transformation option. I think it might even be an adjustment effect. Time, here we are. Time displacement, time difference, time warp. Time effects do not work in stop motion because the brain isn't able to process what it's seeing, and it looks even weirder. It's not your friend. For this sort of work, you're always better off creating a brand new master construct, and this is what my animation is, this is where we're going from. It's a lesson I cannot stress highly enough. This is a lesson that was learned the very hard way. So you now have your work area, that's your video. Isn't it lovely? Let's render. You want to render using the Adobe Media Encoder. And Savannah has drifted off.
It's a lot to take in.
That's why it's being filmed, so you can actually go through and watch it section by section. So, that will start a new program when it appears. There it is, hello. The Media Encoder is installed, much like After Effects, on all your computers. It comes as part of the standard CC suite. There will be another session about the Adobe Media Encoder next week, and exactly how powerful that is and what you can do with it. You shake your head, but you might have to do this one day.
I know I have to do it. It's just the pressure of learning it and then actually the knowledge of actually knowing that you have to do it.
So, the Media Encoder wakes up, and in a moment, the queue will populate with one item. The link is not instantaneous, in the same way that if you load a Photoshop file or an InDesign or an Illustrator file into After Effects and then double-click to open it, it will load the program, and then it will create a link that allows it to push the data in. There, it's appeared. Now, because we've already configured the project to be Film 2K, it goes, well, hang on, this is a really high-res thing, so I'm going to think you want to do that. You don't. Now, because we've shrunk it down, we can pretty much do anything we like. So you've got various presets here. There's literally all kinds of presets. You just choose what you want. Now, in this instance, connected dynamic link server. Give it a moment. So the dynamic link server says, I'm going back to talk to After Effects to find out what it thinks the settings are. It's trying to be helpful.
So there is no other way to export a film from the After Effects software?
Not properly.
All
The
right.
encoder gives us the highest quality, highest set of options.
Mm-hmm.
So you click here, and we now have the export settings. Now, this has no audio, so in order to get the file as small as possible, untick audio. We don't need it. Wait. The video will export at the size it is. We want to do H.264 because that is the most compatible video codec. So once you've unticked export audio, press OK. You then click here, Output File. This says, where am I saving? By default, the very first time you use the media encoder, it will save it within a hidden folder in the computer, because that's the temporary working space it has allocated for itself.
Sorry, did you choose a special format in the window?
No, you just untick audio. You disable audio.
I've got just a quick question. When we're doing the photography for this,
Mhm.
we're doing each frame, we obviously shoot at this massively high resolution.
Yes.
Is it necessary, or is it?
Yes.
It is still. I mean, this isn't condensed.
So,
for the
The rule of thumb here is your source material should always be the maximum possible quality, because then if we say, okay, we need to export this out at varying stages of small, if the client comes back to us and says, no, I need this at full 4K, we have image files that will be able to export out at 4K. If we shoot at HD and then try and upscale, it's going to go to shit. It's much like putting an 800 by 800 image in Photoshop and being told this needs to be 300 DPI. It's not going to work properly. You'll get something, but it's not going to look great.
So this spinning image that we've done now has a huge image quality. It
Yeah.
still's got its
Yeah.
top quality.
When we exported it out of Capture, we made no changes to the resolution or the size. We just wanted JPEGs, and it gave us that admirably. Right, there we are. I have said, export this to my pictures folder. No audio. When you're ready, go. When you're using any form of rendering out of the media encoder or out of After Effects or Premiere or anything like that, don't have anything else open. Try and keep what applications you have running as a minimum as possible. Don't have Capture open, don't have Photoshop open. They will draw phenomenal amounts of power. The other thing is, switch on Caps Lock. Caps Lock says, don't render me a preview. This little preview is literally it's a snapshot preview as to where you are in the video. But if you were to switch that off, After Effects would also be trying to generate an active preview of all your timelines and constructs. And that eats more power and fights the media encoder. The more processing power, the more RAM and the more graphical power the encoder has, the faster it works. It's literally that simple. It's a power-hungry application.
Did you discover all of this? Or did,
I had to learn all this the hard way 15 years ago.
It's a massive amount of information. It's amazing how how you discover all of these things. The Caps Lock stops it previewing everything.
I learned all of this when I was younger. I had no beard and I had a ponytail. I looked very different. I had a ponytail for about a year. That was not the best year of my life. But I learned about After Effects and how media works and what things like VBR1 pass and target bitrate and progressive encoding mean.
You might not have learned that if you didn't have a ponytail.
I like to think I wouldn't have. The ponytail kept me indoors. It's not a good look.
All I've done since it's had a photograph of it.
Does anyone have any questions at this point? Or are we all feeling, if not overwhelmed, then at least not drowning? Yeah, I know.
You'd be using like video though to make these in the future as well, rather than stills? Or?
No. Stop motion animation is one of the oldest original forms of video. And in this instance, when you're working with static items, it's always better than video. The problem you will have with video, if you say we shot this using one of the Nikons and we filmed it, you'd have three problems. One, you need a Steadicam to actually minimize variance in the picture. Two, you need a dolly for a set path. Three, you can't control the speed. So if you shoot it too fast or too slow, you're then getting into speed and time transformation, which is where it begins to get messy. Stop motion with stills is a far cleaner way of doing this. Yes, it takes a little longer, but the results, in my experience, are generally nicer.
Because that was the exact question the client asked the other day. If you've got a turntable that's set up to move and you've got a camera, why don't you just video it?
Well, I thought, yeah, I know what you said.
I didn't know. Yeah.
There we go. That is one rendered cartoon horse. Does that make sense? Excellent. Any questions at this point? Are we all feeling... Yeah? Good. Okay. Does anyone else want to ask anything else about After Effects before I call this session to a close? Any other questions of any kind?
What is the format of the exported video? Is it MP4?
Yeah, it is. So the encoder allows us to export out as anything. So if I drop any preset on here, I can change what format it is. So we can go H.265, we could go HVAC, we could go Blu-ray, we could go old school, MPEG 2. We could do as a P2 movie, which is even older. You could have it as a TIFF image sequence.
Okay.
You could have it as an animated GIF. The encoder doesn't care. It does not care what you give it in and what it puts out. You just need to tell it what you need. And that's why the presets exist. But we will cover that next week. Here endeth the lesson. Everyone go away.
I've got a quick question.
Certainly.
The animation that's going around, is it possible